Something is wrong at Heartland. Ty's eyes don't carry the same calm they once did, and even Amy can sense it. But it isn't Amy who will uncover the truth this time. It's their daughter, Lindy. What she's about to discover will shake the family to its core. A secret that Ty has tried so hard to bury beneath his quiet smiles and long silences. The morning sun stretched lazily across the Heartland Ranch, painting the stables in soft gold. Horses neighed in the distance. The smell of fresh hay filled the air. And everything seemed ordinary. At least, that's what Amy wanted to believe. She moved around the kitchen, flipping pancakes while humming one of Jack's old country tunes. Ty sat at the table with a cup of coffee, but his mind was miles away. His fingers drummed softly on the table, his eyes fixed on the window, watching the horses without really seeing them. Amy smiled over her shoulder, trying to break his silence. "You've been quiet all morning," she said lightly, her voice gentle but curious. Ty looked up, startled, as if pulled back from a deep thought he didn't want to share. "Just tired," he muttered, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Amy nodded, pretending to accept it, but her heart tightened. After all these years, she could read him better than anyone, and she knew that look. Something was weighing on him. Lindy ran in, her boots thudding against the wooden floor, her laughter bright and warm like sunshine. "Dad, can we go check on Spartan later?" she asked, wrapping her little arms around Ty's arm. He smiled then, genuinely, but it faded almost as fast as it appeared. "Sure, sweetheart," he said softly. Amy noticed the brief flicker of pain cross his face when he stood up. It was subtle, but she saw it, the small wince. The way his hand brushed his side as though hiding an ache. The air felt heavy for a moment, though no one said anything. Lindy looked up at her dad curiously, sensing something was different. Ty leaned down, kissed her forehead, and grabbed his jacket. "I'll be out at the barn," he said quietly. "Got some work to finish?" Amy watched him go, the door creaking shut behind him, and the silence that followed made her uneasy. Outside, the world was still and peaceful, yet Ty's thoughts raced. Each step toward the barn felt heavier, the cold morning air biting against his skin. Inside the barn, he paused, taking a deep breath as if the weight of the world sat on his chest. From his pocket, he pulled out a small folded letter, edges worn from being opened too many times. His eyes softened as he read the words again. The handwriting was neat and familiar, one he could never forget. He tucked it away before anyone could see, hiding it under an old saddle on the loft shelf. Back in the house, Amy tried to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. She cleaned the dishes, fed the dogs, and went about her morning chores. But her thoughts kept drifting to Ty. The man she loved had always carried a quiet strength, a calm that steadied everyone around him. But lately, there was something else, something hidden behind those calm blue eyes. She didn't know what it was, but she could feel it creeping into their days like a shadow. Lindy, on the other hand, couldn't ignore her curiosity. From the window, she watched her father in the barn, moving slowly, almost too carefully. She tilted her head, wondering what he was doing alone in there for so long. Her young mind buzzed with questions, and before long, she decided she needed to know. The morning moved slowly. The kind of slow that makes you notice every creak in the floor and every gust of wind against the window pane. Lindy waited until Amy was busy outside feeding the horses, then quietly slipped on her little boots. Her heart thudded with excitement and a bit of guilt. She knew she wasn't supposed to snoop, but something told her that whatever her dad was hiding, it wasn't something small. She pushed open the barn door, the smell of hay and wood washing over her as she stepped inside. The place felt different today, quieter, almost secretive. Dust floated in the beams of sunlight that cut through the small barn windows. Lindy tiptoed between the stalls, careful not to make a sound. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for clues. She remembered seeing her dad climb up to the loft earlier, and without thinking twice, she followed. Her hands gripped the wooden ladder tightly as she climbed up, her heart pounding faster with each step. Up in the loft, everything was still. Old saddles, boxers, and tools were scattered around. Lindy squinted, scanning the cluttered space until something caught her eye, a small piece of paper sticking out from under an old leather saddle. Her curiosity flared. She knelt down and carefully pulled it free. It was a folded letter, the edges soft and slightly torn. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes widening as she read the first line. The words didn't make sense at first. There were names she didn't recognize, a place she'd never heard of, and a tone that felt heavy. But one thing stood out, written in her father's handwriting. "I didn't tell Amy. She can't know. Not yet." Lindy's breath caught in her throat. What couldn't Mom know? Why would Dad write something like that? Her heart raced as she folded the letter back up, her hands trembling. She didn't understand it all, but she knew one thing: this wasn't just about ranch work. This was something big. And deep down, in the quiet stillness of the barn, Lindy realized that her family's perfect peace was about to be shattered. The letter trembled slightly in Lindy's small hands as she sat frozen in the dusty loft. Her knees pulled close to her chest. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the barn wall, falling across her face like soft gold stripes. But her mind was far from the peaceful glow around her. She read the first line again and again, hoping she had misunderstood her father's handwriting. "I didn't tell Amy. She can't know, not yet." The words sank deep, wrapping around her heart with quiet fear. Why would her dad, the man who never kept secrets from anyone, especially her mom, write something like that? She could hear the faint sound of hooves against the dirt outside, the horses restless in their stalls. Everything suddenly felt louder: the creak of the wood, the rustle of hay. Even the wind seemed to whisper questions she couldn't answer. Lindy bit her lip, torn between curiosity and guilt. She shouldn't be reading this. She knew that, but something about the tone of those words made her feel like she needed to know more. Slowly, she unfolded the rest of the letter. Her father's neat but shaky handwriting told a story that made her chest tighten. It mentioned someone named Dr. Grace Harlow, a woman who seemed important to Ty. There were words like symptoms, treatment, and tests. Lindy didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough to know that her dad was hiding something serious, something about his health. Her breath caught in her throat. Was her dad sick? Why hadn't he told them? For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the paper as if it might change its meaning if she looked long enough. She wanted to run to her mom, to hand over the letter and let her fix everything the way Amy always did. But another part of her, the small brave part that wanted to protect her dad, told her to keep quiet. Maybe he had a reason. Maybe he didn't want to scare anyone. She folded the letter again, carefully this time, and slipped it into her jacket pocket. She climbed down the loft ladder quietly, her boots brushing against the old wood. Her heart beat fast, every sound making her jump. When she reached the ground, she glanced around to make sure no one had seen her. The barn was still empty. The quiet felt heavier now, as though the air itself carried her father's secret. Lindy brushed off her jeans and stepped outside, blinking into the bright morning light. From across the yard, she saw her dad coming out of the vet trailer, wiping his hands on a rag. His face looked pale, his eyes tired, but when he saw her, he smiled. It was that warm, familiar smile that always made her feel safe. Only this time, something about it felt forced, fragile. She wondered if he knew she'd been in the barn. If somehow he could sense the truth sitting in her pocket like a hidden stone. "Hey Bug," he said softly, walking toward her. "What are you up to?" Lindy tried to sound normal. "Just helping Mom," she said, forcing a grin. Her voice trembled a little, but Ty didn't seem to notice. He nodded, resting a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle and warm. "That's my girl," he said, then turned toward the paddock to check on the horses. Lindy watched him go, her heart tugging in two directions. She wanted to tell him she knew, to hug him, and promise it would be okay. But something inside her whispered that it wasn't time yet, not until she understood the full truth. That night, long after the lights in the house went out, Lindy lay awake in her bed. The moonlight streamed through her window, painting pale patterns across her quilt. She held the folded letter close, unable to sleep. The words replayed in her mind, like a song she couldn't turn off. Her parents' voices drifted faintly from the living room, soft, tired, familiar. Amy laughed at something, and for a second, everything sounded normal again. But deep down, Lindy knew nothing was normal anymore. She slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake anyone. The house creaked under her small footsteps as she tiptoed to the window overlooking the barn. The lantern inside glowed faintly. Her dad was there again, at this hour. She pressed her hand to the glass, squinting through the darkness. Ty stood by his workbench, hunched slightly, holding what looked like another letter. He rubbed his face, looking weary, then set it down and leaned against the table, his head bowed. It was in that moment that Lindy realized how lonely he looked, not the strong, steady dad she knew, but someone carrying something too heavy for anyone else to see. Tears stung her eyes, and she pressed her lips together to keep from crying. She didn't want to wake her mom. The next morning came with a chill in the air. Amy was already outside feeding the horses, and Ty was gone before breakfast. Lindy sat at the table, her cereal untouched. The letter felt like a weight in her pocket, pulling at her every thought. She didn't want to keep secrets, but how could she tell her mom something she didn't fully understand? She thought of Grandpa Jack's words from long ago. Words he used when she once hid a broken vase. The truth always finds its way out, kiddo. But sometimes, it needs a little help. That was when Lindy made up her mind. She'd find out what her dad was hiding before telling anyone. She owed him that much. Maybe she could help. Maybe she could make it better before it turned into something worse. Outside, the wind swept through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth. The ranch was quiet again, too quiet. As Lindy stepped out into the yard, she looked toward the barn. It stood tall and still, holding the secret that connected them all, a secret that would soon unravel the piece of Heartland in ways no one could have imagined. Evening came to Heartland with a sky painted in bruised shades of orange and purple. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The horses were restless in their stalls, as if they, too, could sense the tension simmering in the air. Amy had gone to help Lisa at the other end of the ranch, and Grandpa Jack was still in town. That left only two people in the quiet barn, Ty and Lindy. Lindy stood at the door for a long time, her small fingers clutching the frame, her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Inside, Ty was hunched over his workbench, fixing one of the horse bridles. The light from the single hanging bulb made shadows crawl across the wooden walls, giving the whole place a strange, secret feel. For a moment, she almost turned around and left. But then she remembered the letter tucked safely in her jacket pocket. The one she'd read a dozen times. The one that whispered that something was wrong. She stepped inside quietly. Dad. Ty looked up, startled at first, but then smiled. Hey bug, couldn't sleep? Lindy shook her head. Her voice came out softer than she meant it to. I needed to talk to you. Something in her tone made Ty's smile falter. He put down the leather strap he'd been holding, wiped his hands on a rag, and turned to face her fully. What's going on? He asked, his voice calm but cautious. She took a deep breath, her chest tight. I found something, she said, eyes locked on his. In the barn, in the loft. The words hung in the air, like dust caught in the sunlight, slow, silent, impossible to ignore. Ty froze, his expression unreadable for a moment, and then he straightened. What did you find? Lindy pulled the folded letter from her pocket, her fingers trembling. She didn't hand it to him right away. Instead, she held it between them like proof of something she didn't fully understand. This, she whispered. I wasn't trying to snoop. I saw you hide it. I didn't mean to read it, but I did. Ty's eyes dropped to the letter. For a moment, he said nothing. The silence grew heavier until it felt like the barn itself was holding its breath. Finally, he exhaled, slow and shaky, and rubbed the back of his neck. You weren't supposed to see that? He said quietly. I know, Lindy said, her voice trembling now. But, why didn't you tell Mom? Why didn't you tell me? Her eyes glistened with tears. She tried to blink away. Are you sick? The question hit him like a hammer. Ty swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. He turned away, pacing slowly, the weight of her words pressing on his shoulders. It's not like that, he said, though his voice lacked the certainty he wanted it to have. I just needed time. I didn't want to worry anyone until I knew more. Lindy frowned, stepping closer. But you are sick, aren't you? She said, her small voice trembling with fear. You wrote about tests and doctors. You said you didn't tell Mom because she'd be scared. Why wouldn't you tell her? She loves you. Ty stopped, his back still turned to her. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, finally, he said, because I remember what it did to her last time. His voice cracked slightly, raw with emotion. When I got sick before, she didn't sleep, she barely ate, she kept smiling just to keep me from breaking down. I saw what that kind of worry does to her. I couldn't put her through that again, not unless I had to. Lindy's heart ached, hearing him say that. She remembered, too faintly, as a child how quiet the house had been. How Amy would sit by Ty's bedside holding his hand long after the doctors said he'd recover. She understood now what kind of pain he was trying to protect them from, but it didn't make it right. You always tell me the truth, she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. You tell me secrets, make things worse, not better. You said love means being honest, even when it's hard. Ty turned then, and the sight of his daughter crying broke something inside him. He knelt down in front of her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. You're right, he said softly. I did say that, and you have every right to be mad at me. She shook her head, sobbing quietly. I'm not mad, I'm scared. That was all it took. Ty pulled her into his arms, holding her close, her small frame trembling against him. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft creak of the barn and the quiet rustle of the horses outside. When Ty finally spoke again, His voice was barely above a whisper. "It's not as bad as it sounds," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The doctor I've been seeing, Dr. Harlow, she helped me years ago, back when I first got sick. I started having some old symptoms again a few months ago, so I reached out to her. It might be nothing, just stress, but I didn't want to worry anyone until I knew for sure." Lindy looked up at him, her eyes wide and glistening. "Does Mom know now?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet, I was going to tell her soon." Lindy's face softened, her voice trembling but determined. "You have to, Dad. If you don't, I will." Ty stared at her, surprised by the strength in her tone. In that moment, he saw Amy's fire in his daughter, that same fearless honesty that had drawn him to her mother all those years ago. He smiled sadly and nodded. "You're right. No more secrets." The storm outside finally broke then, thunder rumbling across the hills, rain tapping against the barn roof. They sat together on the wooden floor, the sound of the rain filling the silence between them. For the first time in months, Ty felt lighter. He'd been carrying his fear alone for too long, hiding behind good intentions. But now, looking at his daughter, brave, loyal, and full of heart, he knew he couldn't keep hiding from the truth. Lindy leaned her head against his shoulder, whispering softly, "We'll fix it, Dad. We always do." Ty smiled faintly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Yeah," he said, his voice low but sure. "We always do." Outside, the storm poured down, washing over the ranch like a promise of change, the kind that hurt before it healed, the kind that always came before something new began. The rain slowed to a soft mist by morning, leaving the ranch bright and clean, as if the world had been rinsed clear. Amy stepped onto the porch with a mug of tea, her hair still damp from the drizzle, and looked over the yard with the calm focus she wore on busy days. She could tell something had shifted. There was a gentleness in the air, but also a weight, the kind that comes after a storm when you are not sure what damage you will find. Lindy stood by the fence, her hands wrapped around the top rail, eyes set on the barn. Amy walked over, sensing her daughter's quiet worry. When she touched Lindy's shoulder, the little girl flinched just a tiny movement, but Amy felt it. "Sweetie," she said softly, "what's going on?" For a heartbeat, Lindy said nothing, and then the words rushed out, simple and shaky. "Mom, Dad needs to tell you something." The world went still. Amy's fingers tightened on the fence as she looked toward the barn, and in that instant she knew the answer to the question she had been afraid to ask for days. Ty was already waiting inside, standing by the workbench with his hands pushed deep into his pockets, like a boy caught doing something he didn't want to explain. When Amy walked in, the smell of leather oil and rain rose to meet her. She stopped a few steps away, searching his face not angrily, just carefully, like she was studying a horse that might spook. "How long?" she asked. The words were small, but they carried years of love and worry. Ty's shoulders sank. He told her about the letters, about reaching out to Dr. Harlow, about the strange waves of weakness, the headaches he had ignored, the old fear that had woken up inside him when the first symptoms returned. He said he had wanted to protect her and Lindy both until he had answers. He said protect like it was a shield that had cracked in his hands. Amy listened without interrupting. When he finished, the silence felt like a long hallway they needed to walk through together. She stepped forward and pressed her palm to his chest, right over his heartbeat, steady and warm under her hand. "I don't want protection," she whispered. "I want partnership. I want all of it, good, bad, messy, scary. That's what we promised." A tear rolled down his cheek before he could stop it. He nodded. He said he was sorry. She didn't ask him to be. She just wrapped her arms around him and held on, the simple, steady hold that. Lindy stood in the doorway, unsure if she should come closer, and Amy opened her arm without looking, the way mothers do, and Lindy rushed in. The three of them stayed like that for a long moment, their breaths slow and even, a little family island in the big, quiet barn. When they finally pulled apart, Amy asked for details, not like an alarm bell, but like a rider planning a safe path through unknown ground. When was the last episode? What did the doctor think? What tests were left? Ty told them everything, and with each answer, the fear in the room softened into a plan. They would call Dr. Harlow together. They would drive into town for the lab work. They would set a time with the clinic at the university. No hiding. No waiting alone. Amy wrote the steps on a scrap of paper from Ty's bench and tucked it into her pocket like a promise that action was stronger than fear. The day rolled on with gentle chores, each one holding a piece of normal life that reminded them who they were. Amy worked Spartan in the ring, keeping the session short but sweet. talking to him in that soft voice that always calmed even the most troubled horse. Ty checked Amara's hoof, and laughed, really laughed, when she tossed her head and snorted as if telling him to hurry up. Lindy brushed the colt near the fence line, singing under her breath, the tune simple and steady. At lunch, they sat on the back steps with sandwiches and lemonade. No one tried to fill the spaces with fake cheer, but there was lightness in the quiet now, because everything was out in the open, and the truth had room to breathe. In the late afternoon, Grandpa Jack's truck rolled into the yard. He climbed out, took one look at their faces, and knew there was a story he hadn't heard yet. Amy told him with a steady voice and a strong chin. Jack listened, his weathered hands on his belt, eyes soft. When she finished, he nodded once and said the kind of line only Jack could say without it sounding like a slogan. We've faced worse with less. We'll face this together. He pulled Ty into a rough hug, clapped his back, then winked at Lindy and asked if she'd help him check the fence line later. She lit up, relief shining in her eyes, because if Grandpa was calm, maybe the world wasn't falling apart after all. Evening came with a clear sky washed clean by rain. They carried blankets out to the pasture hill and watched the light slide off the horses' backs like liquid gold. Amy took Ty's hand, lacing their fingers the way she used to when they were young and unsure of everything but each other. She told him the truth she had been holding back, that she had seen the witnesses, the quiet nights, the way he stared at the stars like he was asking them for answers. She said she had been afraid to push, afraid that if she said the words out loud, it would make the fear real. He smiled and said that not saying it had made it worse. They laughed at that a little, the kind of laugh that tastes like tears but feels like hope. Lindy lay between them and pointed out a bright star. That one, she said, is for bravery. Amy kissed her forehead. Ty promised they would follow that star, even on cloudy nights. Because bravery wasn't loud, it was steady. They went inside when the first chill reached their backs. Before bed, Ty picked up the phone and called Dr. Harlow. He put it on speaker. Amy squeezed his hand and said hello to the doctor like an old friend stepping into the kitchen. They set the date for tests, clear as a marker on a calendar. When the call ended, the house felt different, safer, somehow. Plans had a way of building walls around the people you love. Thin walls, maybe, but walls that could hold while you gathered strength. That night, after lights out, the ranch settled into its familiar hum. In the darkness, Amy whispered that she was proud of Ty, not for being strong, but for being honest. He whispered that he was scared, and she said she was, too, and that was okay. Lindy, half asleep, murmured from her room that they would fix it, that they always did. And in that small house, with its creaking floors and warm walls, the promise of healing stretched between them like a bridge. Tomorrow would bring doctors, tests, and more unknowns. But tonight brought the thing that makes tomorrow bearable. The truth spoken, the fear shared, the love steady as a heartbeat. Outside, a horse snorted and settled. Inside, 3 breaths fell into the same calm rhythm. The secret was no longer a shadow. It was a road, and they would walk it together.